Welcome to our webinar series. Really great that you could join us. It's so good to have you once again. I'm just waiting a few seconds as we have participants logging in and joining into our conversation. We have lots in store for you today, including hearing from you. We've got some polls on the go that you'll be able to vote on. And of course, as usual, we have a question and answer series as well towards the end of the conversation. And you can start jotting down your thoughts. I'm sure a lot of you have thought about this topic quite extensively leading up to this webinar. So we'll be waiting for you to get involved in the conversation as we get started. And I think we're doing pretty well. All right, there we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we should get the show on the road. So welcome once again to those who have just logged on. My name is Eleni Giokos. I'm a correspondent at CNN. So really good that you could join us again. In fact, this is the third webinar I'm doing for the Africa CEO Forum. So delighted to be back once again. Today, our theme is post-COVID logistics in Africa, taking up challenges, seizing opportunities. This is the third webinar that forms part of the series African Champions, dealing with the COVID-19 crisis. It's devoted to business leaders operating in Africa, brought to you by the Africa CEO Forum, and it's also in collaboration with African Bank. So I mentioned that we'd love to engage with you, so please do jot down your thoughts. You can take a look at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. And we'll be doing a question and answer session towards the end of the day as well. So definitely let us know what your experiences are. Also look out for two polls that we've put together. You'll be able to vote, and those outcomes that will then be discussed during the panel discussion as well. Take a look at your screen right now. We've got a hashtag for Twitter and for social media platforms that you can use to tweet some of the outcomes that you hear today and some of the interesting insights that we'll be discussing. The hashtag is ACF Digital Events. Right, so ladies and gentlemen, time to kick off our conversation. Maersk Logistics posted a net profit of $202 million, and MSC doubled its container traffic in the Port of Lome, all in the first quarter of 2020. These numbers are really important because they're starting to show that logistics companies can maintain margins during the times of crisis and even during a pandemic. However, we know that global trade is expected to deteriorate significantly in this year, and we also know that global growth levels are increasingly becoming worse as we head further and deeper into this crisis. It's impacting investments, and of course it's important to see how companies are holding back on projects that they were initially quite excited about in the beginning of this year. As we know, businesses are becoming a lot more reticent in terms of where they are putting their money and what it will mean for the long term as well. We're also starting to see countries shifting focusing on healthcare, and of course starting to put money aside as we start to see sovereign debt issues becoming a reality as well. So we know uncertainties remain high, challenges, but opportunities as well are rising across the board. So what is consolidation within the logistics industry going to look like after COVID-19? What impact will the deterioration of the state's public accounts have on logistic projects and the shape of the likes of public-private partnerships as well? And here's why it's really important. These are the numbers that I've been focusing on for the last few years, and they're still so relevant today. PwC is estimating that $2.2 billion could be saved per year in logistics costs if throughput on ports in sub-Saharan Africa is doubled. If we improve performance by 25%, that could reduce the price of imported goods in sub-Saharan Africa by around $3.2 billion annually and add around $2.6 billion to the value of exports as well. So it makes sense financially. How do we get that going? How do we make sure that this pandemic does not set us back, but in fact, that we take hold of the opportunities ahead of us as well? So I'd like to welcome our speakers today. We've got Amaury de Féligonde, Managing Partner at OCAN, David Elbez, Head of Africa for Terminal Investment at MSC, Bola Bamidele, the Senior Investment Officer at IFC, and Sébastien Beuque, the Deputy CEO of Africa for Bola Logistics. We also have a guest speaker today, Sanjeev, Gadhia, the CEO of Astral Aviation Limited, that we'll be hearing from a little later this hour. So to set the scene for us and to put things into perspective, I'd like to hand over to Amaury now, who has collated key data on the current state of the industry, and this is going to help create an overview as we head into our conversation. So Amaury, welcome. Great to have you with us. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Eleni. I'm very glad. So dear colleagues and friends, I'm very happy to introduce our Logistics in Africa panel in the name of Okan Partners, a financial advisory boutique dedicated to Africa. I'm just checking if the slides are coming. It's perfect. First, what is and what will be the post-COVID context? 3 key points. First, without surprise, data show a huge traffic slowdown. Volume of goods exchanged across the continent has been reduced by more than 30% on a yearly basis in the last few months. Of course, the situation is very different depending on countries and subsectors. For instance, air traffic is less than 5% of normal level for passengers. All of us who do not have a private jet can feel it. But we'll see with Sanjeev the specific situation of air cargo. Seaborne logistics is more resilient with 70 to 80% of traffic. Sébastien from Bola and David from MSC will tell us a bit more about that. The second point is the decent resilience of African logistics so far, at least, thanks to early action by governments and the strategic status given to the logistics sector. But, and that's my third point, months and years to come will be difficult for many logistics actors in a context of massive recession. Some will have to fight hard to simply survive. Not only African SMEs and their logistics suppliers, but also big companies like Mauritius Airways, South African Airways, which were already affected before COVID. Post-COVID, we'll see a new normal in logistics also, with challenges, but also opportunities to be seized by the main actors of the logistics ecosystem. I'll split these challenges and opportunities in 4 broad categories. First opportunity. For private logistics companies, the sector will offer consolidation opportunities through strategic alliances and targeted M&A operations. We can see on the left-hand side of this slide that in 10 years, the top 24 shipping companies have consolidated into only 3 main alliances: 2M, Ocean Alliance, and The Alliance, a massive consolidation play at global level. On the right-hand side, you can see 2 recent examples of M&A in logistics in Africa. Siva Logistics, recently bought by CMA from France, has acquired a majority in AMI from Dubai last May, despite the COVID situation, in a move to integrate the whole logistics value chain in East Africa. A few months ago, AP Motor Capital has acquired a stake in Arise Ports, bringing more than 200 million euros in fresh cash to boost port development in Africa. A big challenge for many actors of the logistics ecosystem will be to go digital full speed. Many companies have experienced working from home remotely during the lockdown period. They will have to go way further. It is true for private companies, shippers, terminal operators, truckers. It is also true for key public institutions like customs administration, public ports and airport authorities, etc. With many African governments facing a wall of debt repayments with acute needs in social sectors. Many privatization opportunities should appear. In addition to the existing ones, you can see port concessions on this map with operators like Bolloré, MSC, DP World, etc. Ports, airports, railways, and urban transportation should be up for sale in the coming months and years, and public-private partnerships should pick up. I will end up with an open question. Will the African governments, the private companies, the logistics actors seize the opportunity offered by the Made in Africa, the regional trade blocs, and the future continental free trade area? Even before COVID, many international companies began rethinking their reliance to China. African countries should be trying to seize this opportunity. A lot remains to be done, despite good examples shown here, like Tangemed Logistics and Industrial Hub in Morocco, the Nkok Wood Cluster in Gabon, the Textile Free Zone in Ethiopia, connected now to the global consumers with the new train line. Some of these key points will be treated in our Logistics in Africa report to be released next September. I thank you very much for your attention.
Fantastic, Amaury. Thank you so very much. That was truly fascinating. You've left us with so much to think about. And I'm assuming you mean this September, right? In a few months' time.
Absolutely, yes.
Great. We'll be looking out for that. I think it's going to be key in terms of figuring out the big trends that are playing out as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, don't forget that we'd love to hear from you. Send us your questions, bottom right-hand side of your screen. We're going to get straight into the conversation now. Our first key topic is global competition, supply chain disruption, and how were companies able to survive the crisis. And Amaury had also just alluded to this. We've got the big players on this panel today. We have MSC, so David from MSC, and don't forget MSC's significant footprint across the African continent. In fact, it accounts for around 12% of African traffic, from ports to shipping to rail as well. Bola with the International Finance Corporation. Without the money, without the backing of institutions like the IFC, we wouldn't be able to see a lot of projects materialize. So we'll definitely get very interesting insight into where to from here, from Bola, and then Sébastien from Bolloré. What an incredible track record across the continent. And of course, Bolloré has played such a significant role in the logistics story in Africa across the whole value chain. So really excited to get into this with you. I'm going to actually ask the audience the first question. So here, take a look at your screen for me, please. Here's a poll I'd like to get you involved in. All right, so from your own business perspective, how would you rate the African logistics supply chain adaptation to the COVID-19 crisis? Excellent, very good, good, rather not good, or not good at all. So please vote for me, and then we will be discussing the outcomes of that poll as we get on with the conversation today. All right, fantastic. So David, I'd like to start off with you. I mean, I know MSC has seen an increase in first quarter shipments, but it hasn't been smooth since then. What parts of your business have been most impacted by the pandemic? And could you share some numbers with us?
Firstly, just to give a short picture, you know, MSC Group through TL, the terminal, Medlog and the MSC agencies is in 40 countries in Africa, and we have different scenarios in this country. And from this country, we have 50 ocean services and local feeders. We have a global connectivity with the over the world. We have 123 weekly calls in Africa in 60 different African ports, and we are in the board and as a shareholder or as an operator in 4 terminals in Africa, in Lomé, San Pedro, Tanger, and Tinkan. And we develop with Medlog some road and railway logistic solutions, inland logistics and warehousing. So, of course, as Amaury said, we had a big impact about the crisis of COVID-19 is the exchanges between Africa and the other continents. But we had our main action. It was to preserve our capacity and efficiency, to preserve the jobs of our staff and employees, to guarantee to our staff the safe condition of work, because without safe condition of work, you can guarantee the service and good condition and productivity. And in same time, to preserve the future, to fix a strict cost control, and to control the capex and investment. Some of them can be postponed, but we respect the investment what we engage with the authorities and in several projects. But it has our main challenge actually with the COVID crisis 19. Before to speak, after the COVID-19 crisis, we must manage day after day the daily business.
Okay, so
and
CapEx, you put CapEx spend on hold. That's what you're saying. I mean, how much?
Not we re-examine at each situation if we can postpone, or if we have to do it to preserve the condition of the operation and to preserve our project, you know. But of course, maybe we can delay some, but we will do it in any case. But we have to manage day after day. And the first point is to preserve our activity, the job of our staff, and the condition of work, and the good level of services for our customer, shipping line and shippers. But we have a special consequences in our two terminals, as like Lomé and San Pedro, due to the congestion in some other ports for San Pedro, as like Nigeria, Cameroon, or Conakry, due to the, you know, the measure for the COVID-19, and we multiplicate our volumes in San Pedro per 3, and in Lomé we will multiplicate our volume per 2 due to the change of the road and the flux of sea freight between the different continents. So we receive now the empty containers for China, the reefer empty containers for China in Lomé, to send it to South America.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Thank you for that. Sébastien, let's take a look at your global shipment numbers and how that compares to the activity and the volumes that you've seen with regards to the African story right now. To what extent have you seen a disruption? And do you have any numbers that you could share with us that could illuminate the extent of that impact?
Yeah, good day, everybody. I think when we look at the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on Africa, just some figures that Africa is representing roughly 3% of the global business and transportation over the world. So some of the countries has been badly impacted for characteristic specificity. We will see that later on. Some I'm not saying benefiting, but are strongly fighting against this crisis. So when we look at the various, let's say, transportation vectors. So if we start by the maritime sector, we see, as David said, that most of the line have reshuffled their service, has decreased their capacity to adapt to the demand. We saw globally on our terminals in West Africa for the first quarter, the volumes were quite steady. We notice since April, May, it's true a decrease in volumes, okay? But for the time being, the Chinese is coming back on track. European, let's say, exchange are coming back. So yes, we face some decrease. We saw that now that business is coming back on the port side. What we can see also in the exportation, because this is really important, due to the fact that, for instance, in India or Pakistan, or some of the industry of garment has been closed, we can see that more and more cotton is stored in the port in Africa. We can see the cashew nuts, it's not really going to be exported as it should be. So we notice that in terms of exportation, a decrease in the commodities some of the countries are badly hit. I mean, David mentioned Nigeria, yes. Nigeria, which is a big importer, as seeing its volume decreased, but some of the countries has been remaining stable. So this is first for the maritime sector. On the air freight, just to give, I think, an important figure, 80% of the general cargo is transported by passenger flight. So suddenly, almost all the airports for the commercial reason closed in Africa with no solution of cargo transportation by air, okay? So this, we have seen an important decrease. As a group, we have reacted to this issue by setting some chartered flight from Europe connecting with China, mainly from Belgium and France. So we chartered almost 30 planes to many African capital city to provide first urgent cargo for sanitary reason, and secondly, urgent cargo for the mining, oil and gas industry, which were in badly need of such a type of cargo.
So really fascinating. I mean, just hearing what David and Sébastien is saying in terms of the changes, you know, even just the changes of the commodities. You're talking about Nigeria, the pent-up demand of, you know, goods sitting at ports, and we're seeing it as countries even say, you know, what is essential? What are we going to allow in, and what are we going to allow out? So that's really an interesting litmus test. So I think, for you, Bola, you know, we've learned during this pandemic, one of the biggest stories right now is the importance of having access to funding, and specifically on the sectors that matter. And the sectors that matter right now is still absolutely healthcare. But is there a risk that as we start to shift focus across the continent onto what is deemed essential, that you are perhaps worried about money being taken away from the logistics and infrastructure space? And what has your experience generally been at the IFC as nations try and recover? We know that there's always huge infrastructure projects when it comes to economic recovery. Do you think that's going to be part of the narrative as we start working our way through this crisis?
Thank you very much, Elena, and thanks to the rest of the panel. It's truly a pleasure to be joining you. I just wanted to start off by, you know, giving a quick overview of what the World Bank Group, and in particularly IFC, has done in terms of having a quick response to the COVID crisis. So we had IFC and the World Bank Group approved a $14 billion facility as a fast track to support companies and countries in the efforts to prevent and reduce some of the impacts of COVID. And within that context, about $8 billion of that went to the IFC. And we then focused on what we call the real sector and then the financial markets. So the financial markets for us, or financial institution groups, is to help the SMEs that have really been impacted. And when you look at logistics, you do have a large number of SMEs within this subsector. When you talk, you know, and then of course, in the real sector, transport and logistic and moving goods along the last mile, it's very key for us. So when I look at some of the lessons learned, I think listening to Amaury and to my colleagues, the other panelists, I think our overdependence on the global logistic value chain is one of the key takeaways. You know, because of one of the key things that I found that was very interesting is that we were forced to look inwards. And then we have to now start re-examining what we consider the traditional last miles. So, and now within African context is really the new last mile. What is happening from the ports to the end users? And really, historically, we have funded large infrastructure projects. And I think with the new last miles, they're much smaller transactions, there's increased demand, and you know, there's always opportunities for funding some of these projects. I'm actually losing you because of poor connectivity, so I may ask you to perhaps repeat your question.
No, you hit it spot on, actually. You were fantastic on the lessons learned. And you've given us so much to think. If I could ask all of you to please be concise so we can keep this conversation and momentum going. As quickly as you want goods to move through borders, as quickly as we want to get through some of the good topics today. All right, so Sébastien, I'm going to go to you. The border delays that we're seeing within landlocked countries. And we've been really focusing on some of those stories in terms of what truck drivers are going through with increased COVID-19 screening and so forth. We're seeing some really, really bad stories emerging because it's firstly delaying goods, it's an impact on drivers, and then you're worried about how the cost of goods is going to be impacted down the line as well. What is your sense, Sébastien, of what you've seen in that part of the value chain, and how does it impact you at the end?
It is true that in some, specifically interland countries, they face some closings of the border, simply as that, like in many continents. So the time for the authorities to adapt, and we've seen that also in Europe, so it's not specific to Africa, it has created some delay in the trucking to the interland countries. What we can see also is that as railway operator, the rail, and I think we will speak about rail infrastructure later on, is very important and has been very instrumental, at least in Burkina or in Camara Isitai for Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Chad, and Central Africa, in allowing a better communication, because you have less disruption in terms of transportation, and you can have a massification of the transportation, and having not this issue of closing the border with good organization between the countries. So railway is for sure during this crisis has been an asset for me, according to me, for Burkina Faso or Chad or RCA, through this good connectivity and smooth operation. And now, okay, that some of the borders has been closed, which for sanitary reason, it's reopening, and business is coming back. I'm not saying to normal because you need a bit of time to adjust, but it will come back to a smoother operation.
Okay, so David, if you could weigh in here as well, because I think that is one of the biggest things that's playing out on the logistics and movement of goods stories, is just what's happening within the continent right now before things even get to the port. And when they do get to the ports, we're actually still seeing disruptions there where things are still very slow to leave the continent. Do you think that we're starting to streamline that process, where it's starting to get a bit better?
Well, firstly, I would like just to complete what Sébastien said about the question before. In the coast state, some measure was taken in partnership with the terminals and the shipping line to respond at the problem of the delay at the borders for the interland services, is to give some rebates or to cancel all the cost of storage of the containers in the terminal in several ports. I think it was a good support and good response to the problematic of the delay at the border or the closure of the border, and it was a very important point. But we see slowly now restart the activities, and so the operators and the shippers came more and more to take their containers or to reapproach their containers.
All right, fantastic. Bola, yeah. I know that you worked as director for AMPT. It's an inland services for Central Africa. This is an interesting, I think you're going to give us interesting insights into what you experienced back then. We've always had border delays and border issues. The pandemic has merely exacerbated that. Tell me about the hurdles that you experienced then that you're still seeing now, and how we can overcome this, and what opportunities there are right now to tackle these issues head on.
Thank you. I think, the notion of the traditional last mile, which is always to the port, it's something that, we've seen investment, we've seen private sector participation. However, when we're looking at a new last mile, which is from the port to the end user, to the consumers, the transportation of goods from the port to the warehouses, from the warehouses to the end users, there is a need to unlock some of the challenges in there. When we look at Africa, the majority, with the exception of South Africa, of the goods that we have to transport is by road. And when we look at the conditions of our roads, you also have some of these challenges. There is the issue of cost of production, which makes transportation of goods very expensive. And when you compare, basically shipping, the global value chain is more efficient than our local value chains. So when you look at the cost of shipping a container from maybe China and the time to the port of Lagos or to the port of Mombasa, and you compare that with the time and the cost of actually getting that same container from the port to the end user, and the cost, the time, and these are areas where we feel that we've seen some of the challenges. And I think going forward, the issue of the roads, the issue of custom efficient and transparent custom practices, I believe that technology is going to help us to improve some of this, digitalization of some of our processes, but the bottom line remains that we have to drive costs down. We need partnerships, and it's not just the private sector, it's the government participation. It's also having forms of basically unlocking this with, in partnership with people like the IFC and the World Bank Group, where we can look at what do we need to do to unlock the whole value chain to make it more efficient, and who are the key players and how do we support them.
Absolutely. I mean, look, to be honest, we've been discussing this very topic for a very long time on the logistics front, right? So something's got to change now, and I'm hoping it's now. And we've asked you a question, and you voted on a poll. And here's what we asked you, and here are the results. We're going to have our panelists respond. From your own business perspective, how would you rate the African logistics supply chain adaptation to the COVID-19 crisis? Interestingly, 48% of you said good, and 32% say rather not good. An interesting 5% say excellent. So these are interesting numbers. So you basically, I mean, the people that are joining us today and watching on say that logistics companies have mostly been able to adapt quite well. 32% not very good. David, give me a sense of what you think it took to really adapt during this time. What are the three main things that you needed to put into place to ensure that you kept things going at the same level, that you didn't have a disruption?
For this question, it's interesting because it's not why you have a crisis that you can reduce the cost of your activities, and we are obliged to maintain the capacity of the operations, and we have to maintain, as I said, the job of the people. So even if we have a COVID-19 crisis, after you have different parts in the logistic, and the logistic in general, for example, for the trekking on the road, it's an open market in Africa, and you have competition. So the competition has to play with the offer and with the customer. It's the same for the sea freight rate. So the market will give the level of price. It's not a decision of a company,
Okay, great. I am now going to head into our guest speaker that's joining us today. We've got Sanjeev Gadhia, the CEO of Astral Aviation Limited. And he's the CEO of a Kenyan air cargo company based in Nairobi and London, earning around $250 million a year in revenue. And luckily, Astral Aviation has focused on cargo as opposed to the movement of people. So Sanjeev, welcome. And I'm sure that you are smiling as opposed to other airline industries, players that are suffering immensely. So good for you, firstly, for focusing on cargo. Tell us about how COVID-19 has impacted your business, how you've maintained your activity, what you've done overall. And I'm also just curious how you've had a hand in ensuring that you're moving essential products like PPE over this time.
Thank you, Eleni, and good afternoon, everyone from Nairobi, Kenya. It's been a great 3 months, especially in the air cargo industry, because what we have experienced is exponential growth during the pandemic. But what is very important to remember about air cargo is that it is dependable, it is reliable, and it is quick, and it forms an integral part of the supply chain. But in the case of the pandemic, other forms of transport were affected during the shutdown, and this resulted in massive logistical challenges. And as for us, we've been extremely busy during the pandemic working from the office, and we've been flying extensively both from Europe to Africa and also within Africa. The kind of cargo we've actually been carrying comprises of two very important commodities. One is food and the other one is PPEs. So what we've actually been doing is that we've been transporting perishables from Nairobi to the United Kingdom and Belgium, which is something we've been doing now for 8 years. But following the pandemic, we've also noticed an increase in the demand of PPEs from China to our Nairobi hub. And once it arrives in Nairobi, we transport it to 24 countries in Africa. This is something which we have done for the UN. We've also done it for our customers like DHL and Bolloré, which we are very grateful for. And definitely it's been a very busy period, not only for us as an airline, but also for other members of the air cargo industry.
Absolutely. I mean, exponential growth. Can you give me a percentage?
Just to give you an idea, Eleni, in terms of network growth, we've expanded our network by 50%. And when you look at our fleet, before the pandemic, we were at 7 aircrafts. Now we're at 15. So you can actually see 100% growth in our fleet. And this is all in line with the demand that we've experienced during the pandemic. And we're very confident that this demand is not going to go away. We expect that this will actually continue into 2021.
So interesting that you say that. I mean, in combination of low oil prices and of course the airline and aircraft makers have also brought down their prices because they haven't been able to move aircraft, right? So that combination definitely plays in your favor. But once passenger flights start to resume, and they also have an important part, a cargo element to their businesses, are you worried that things are just going to settle down for you once we get into a post-COVID world environment, and how are you gearing up for that risk?
That's a great question, because we've actually seen that a lot of passenger airlines have adapted their strategy by carrying cargo on the seats. And what has happened is that we've always been competing with passenger airlines for the last 20 years, and we've always been able to compete on weight and volume. As we can carry more on a cargo aircraft compared to what you can carry on a passenger aircraft. And a good example is trying to load furniture in a car compared to a truck. And this is really where the advantage of being a cargo airline and transporting cargo on large cargo aircrafts is a model which is very sustainable and has a great future.
Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, I'm curious as well to find out. I mean, you were saying that cargo is reliable, it's fast, but historically it's also been very expensive, and it's the reason why you see inflated prices in landlocked countries on the continent, and that's why there was this big move to try and get roads and railway a lot more efficient, because it is a cheaper option for many of the landlocked countries. How important is that entire value chain, do you think, for your business down the line, or do you see yourself competing with the ports and the shipping industry and rail? How do you play that out?
When you look at air cargo, there is a very clear value proposition, and that is time. Time does come with money, and when you look at the whole concept of the integrators who are transporting envelopes and parcels using a very time frame which is definite, that is what really the consumer is paying for. But one of the biggest challenges we have in Africa is the high cost of taxes, and this is really having an impact on our business. The air cargo industry or the aviation industry is taxed very heavily. There is taxes on fuel, there's taxes on airport fees, there's taxes on ground handling. And this is really very unfortunate, but we are doing something about it, because we are lobbying African governments to try and reduce the tax, because as an airline, when we pay tax, we have to pass it on to the consumer. And that is what is making air cargo generally more expensive.
Absolutely. Okay, so the drone industry, I've seen so many reports about the exciting sector of drone transportation, that it's going to be a really important part of the value chain. How are you guys playing in this field?
Well, I think the timing is really great, Eleni, because we're very excited to share with you a very major development in our business, which is to integrate large cargo drones in our fleet, which is going to start in September with the integration of our newest cargo drone, which can carry 2 tons and has a range of 1,200 kilometers and can land in unpaved airfields and in water. So we become the first airline in the world, and it's very proudly African, to actually use the large cargo drones in Africa. And I think the real reason for the use of the drones is to make sure that we can reach places which are remote, which are inaccessible, and with poor infrastructure, thus reducing the time to delivery. So I'm very happy to inform you that we really have big plans, and there will be a day in the very near future when we will have more drones in our fleet compared to fixed wing aircrafts.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Sanjeev. Really great to speak to you and wishing you all the best. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. That's a perfect segue into our next topic about buyouts, digitization, relocations, what changes are expected in the foreseeable future. And it's interesting to hear Sanjeev talking about drones. We also know that MSC has done new methods in terms of e-payments to try and streamline that. So I think, David, I'm going to start off with you. How has COVID changed the way that you are viewing digitization and how it needs to be part of your business model in a far more aggressive way? David, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry. About the digitization, you know, in our business, and we were yet in the middle of the process, or at the end of the process on the certain part, because when you work with the worldwide shipping line, you're obliged to be in advance in the digitization. The main problem in Africa that we were late about, you know, the document exchange in the terminal and the shipping line business with the customers, and we have to work again with the banks, with the authorities to develop the digitization services. But in general, in worldwide, all the business around the shipping line services is yet done. So, and for the internal management, we succeed to manage the COVID-19 crisis because we were in a digitization process for a long time.
All right, Sébastien, I want to talk about acquisitions and buyouts and the opportunities for consolidation. And Amaury had given us some interesting perspectives there, specifically about, you know, alliances that exist, and that the prognosis is, in fact, during every crisis, you always see consolidation. Do you think there's going to be opportunities? Are you eyeing out anything? I know you always focus on organic growth, but are you willing to look at what new things come to the fore?
Yeah, I mean, in the African continent is very vast. You know, it's more than 50 countries. So when we are speaking about Africa, I think we have to be realistic in terms of area, in terms of opportunities. Yes, we are used to internal growth. Okay, you know that the Bola group has been built since almost 200 years on acquisition, on various acquisition in network in Africa, so that we have consolidated, okay, and diversified. Now we are covering 47 countries in Africa with our own operation, terminal operation, railway operation, logistics, hub, warehousing. And I believe the coronavirus situation will enlighten the fact that our customers are looking for sound financial and professional operation in terms of logistics. So yeah, there are some challenges which we don't have to deny, but some of the countries will perform very well or will recover very well. Some, because of specific internal reason, will not be able to follow. But yes, we are there in Africa for 200 years. We are an African logistics company, yeah. And we intend to continue our expansion, either by internal growth that we are used to do, or to look at some opportunities if some are not too expensive, profitable, and can integrate our network.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Bola, I've got some questions coming through already from the audience, and I'd like for you to take a look at some of these. How will the African Free Trade Agreement impact logistics post-COVID? And that's from Marlon Burgess, Director of SAMED.
I think, I mean, first and foremost, we must commend the progress that has taken place so far. We have 30 countries that have already ratified the African continent free trade zone. So I think that is positive. I think there will be increase in trade, and I think it's a good thing for our continent. More importantly, though, we need to start looking at revamping our local value chain. We need to start looking at the sub-regional intertrade, and then the global and then the regional trade. So I think it's going to have a positive impact on the continent, and really digitization is going to take place. I think we're going to be looking at the differences between goods and services. Services will be less onerous, where goods requires more intensive restructuring for us to fully benefit from this.
Right, I'm going to launch the second poll now, and same goes as the first time. Please click on 2 items that are most relevant for you, and this is the question: what is key for the African logistics supply chain to be more effective? And you can see there are options there from more roads to more political will. So please submit your answer, and I'll be tackling those as the conversation continues. And I think it's really very relevant now for us to move on to the last topic of the day, and probably one of the most important, right? Where does the money come from? So companies, DFIs, and states, how to build mutually beneficial partnerships. And partnerships, of course, is the key. And Bola, I'd like for you to start this conversation and kickstart this. Bankable projects. When countries come to you and say, listen, we want a new railway, this is what we want to do, but this is how much money we'll need. Is it, obviously partnerships are going to be important, but financing institutions play such a vital role because you need to look at the economic viability first. Tell me about the state of play right now and how you think this is going to evolve in the next few months.
So I think you used the word partnership, and I really like that. So I think everyone needs to be part of the game. So you need the government to make sure that, obviously the deals are well structured. You need the private sector to also feel the need that if they're going to make these investments, there definitely is going to be a decent return on their investment. So I think partnership, and when we look at subsectors, I think investment in existing ports infrastructure would continue. We have been seeing more and more requests for investments in the continent for brownfield projects. When we start looking at greenfield, so you're looking at much larger transaction, $1 billion in size, the role of the investment funds has been extremely important because they are coming in with large tickets as equity contribution to this project. So I think government role is very important, the private sector, as well as the investment funds. More importantly, though, what we're seeing, in order for us to create a lot of these greenfield projects, there is a need to actually go upstream to figure out how do you create an enabling environment? How do you work with the government to make it attractive for private sector to come into some of this project? So it's definitely a partnership and working with the different stakeholders.
I'm glad you said, how do you make this attractive for the private sector to truly come in? Who better to tell us than Sébastien and David, who have done these time and time again, working with governments and obviously teaming up with people across the board. Sébastien, what would you say the hardest thing is to work with a government across the continent? And what are the things that you look out for when you start and you get into the conversations?
I mean, it's for sure the post-COVID situation in Africa will drive huge investment and financing in Africa. Okay, there is no fatality. There is one point that I share with Bola, that the risk or the perception of the risk in Africa is not reflecting the reality in my view. The cost of money is too high in terms of investment. So we were speaking about return on investment, but when you have loans because of this perception of risk in Africa, 5, 6, 7% on 25 years, 30 years financing infrastructure, when it's comparing in Europe, 0.5, even 1%. So it's not a lack of money that can go in Africa. For me, it is a perception of the risk and to adapt the price of this investment to Africa. And the main investors, they have to realize that with a well considered project, a long-term basis, Africa has been showing resilience in this and organization, by the way, because we are speaking about a very short period of time. Yes, of course, between 2 to 3 months, the whole chain was impacted, but we can see that business is coming up, and the risk has to be less perceived and to have access to a cheaper investment in terms of funding.
I mean, it's interesting you talk about perceptions of risk, and one country that has been able to overcome those perceptions and negativity has always been China. And in fact, there's always a saying, China goes where many fear, trade to fear, fear to trade rather. So it's an interesting play there. And David, I want to get you into this and tell me about the narrative of China's role on the continent and how important their role is, or whether you see it as a risk? Because I know that you've got a joint venture with the Chinese, but you know, do you think that this is an important part of the logistics story that will be playing out in the next few years?
Yeah, just and quickly to complete that what I said before and Sébastien about the risk, we did a greenfield project in Lomé with LCT. Yeah? It was in partnership with IFC, and at this time the attractivity of this country was not the same as today. And now the success of this project we can permit to connect through Africa, China, and South America. So if we can upgrade the level of the investment and the condition of the logistic, and we can connect the Africa to the other world, the same condition as we are actually in Far East or in Europe or in America, we can see the result and we can have the attractivity of the African continent. And for me, it's a win-win situation between the state, the loaner as AFC, and the operator, investor as like MSC, and in the middle of that, we brought some partners, China partners, China merchant. They have 50% of this terminal, and it's a global success. And when we fix the condition of this partnership, for everybody is a win-win situation, and we can face a crisis as like today.
Okay, I want to go to our poll that we asked you a short while ago and just get the results. So we asked you, what is the key for the African logistics supply chain to be more effective? 16% saying more roads, 26% saying more political will. It's really a mixed bag. It's fascinating. More roads, 16% more rail, 10% more bankable projects, 8%. I mean, looking at these numbers, I'll stay on the screen for a while, and more investment from the private sector, 10%. It's interesting, you know, we've done a few of these polls and we always ask the question about political will, whether we did it on agriculture or whether our conversation was on the retail space. It seems political will just stands in the way of you know, projects and getting things done. Bola, I see you smiling there, so I'm going to put you on the spot. Tell me, because you're like the mediator, right? You've got to make things happen for the private sector and for government.
So I think the political will, the government's willingness, and then we've seen this. We've seen some very good deals, and it's important that whatever these deals are, they're sustainable during different crises. So Côte d'Ivoire would be a good example, for instance, where you've seen several PPPs, and you know, you've had some of these agreements, and they have lived through the difficult times in Côte d'Ivoire. So I think we need to, the government and supporting the government as well. And some of the things that IFC does, we do advise governments on different PPP models. There isn't actually an ideal model. It would depend on the country and the will of the people. So I think definitely IFC involvement in that area is key. And then, of course, also going upstream, working in partnership once again, to figure out where are the key challenges, who needs to come in to resolve this. So I think the public sector has its role, so does the private sector, so does the financial institutions as well. So, but
okay,
that would be my comment.
When we talk about political will, and I've done so many of these stories, by the way, across the continent. I mean, one of the ones that really stuck out for me, Sébastien, was the standard gauge railway in Kenya. And I actually asked you know, the government officials at the time, I said, you know, why did you go with China? And they said, well, the World Bank and the IFC and all the developmental and financing institutions were taking a really long time, and it was harder to negotiate, and China just came in and did it really, really quickly. So Sébastien, what's your view on the role of China, good or bad, and you know, what lessons can we learn from the speed at which they operate?
I mean, this example you gave on Kenya. I mean, the Kenyan authorities. I mean, they are free to choose whatever financing institution or providers for their infrastructure. So the thinking that the Chinese are faster in taking decision to loan a huge amount to this or these governments, this can be subjective, and I believe on the IFC funding, which are very stable, looking at the transparency, looking at the governance, looking at the partner with high I will say, audit of compliance, security of the people might be a different model.
Fantastic. All right. So,
and we see that more and more. I mean, you name China, but there are more and more. I mean, other countries involved in the development in Africa. We can name Turkey. We can name some other countries.
Okay, I'm going to quickly pivot to the questions that we're getting from the audience. We've got so many coming through and they're all fantastic. Don't forget, you can still post your questions. I'm going to try and get through these as quickly as possible. If I could ask my panelists to speed up answers slightly so we can try and get some of these topics through. And I'm going to be starting with a really simple one, but yet so powerful. Can you give us an example of a logistics African champion? And this is from Eve, the Chief Operating Officer from CSTTAO Group. I'm sorry, I'm not saying your surname. I can't pronounce it. So who would like to take this? Bola, you work with so many companies. Who's the African champion here?
Right. There are many champions. And I think one on the innovation side would be Kobo 360, a project that IFC was involved in. So I think involvement, so yes, that'll be my quick response to that.
Yeah, I know about Kobo 360. Interesting. They're pivoting and into blockchain now. So I'm glad you mentioned them. Okay, next question. Has the pandemic crisis already triggered a larger need in extending cold storage warehouses to support the logistics industry? According to my experience, I can figure out that some greenfield investments for trading companies to store more fresh produce to be transported within Africa as a result of increased domestic manufacturing. That's from Leila Kosu. David, do you want to tackle that one?
Hello, you read me?
Yes.
Yes, could you repeat slowly, please?
So the need to build more cold storage warehouses to support the logistics industry. Are you seeing that trend at all?
But to support, the crisis started only 3 months ago. So we can't build a new offer in few weeks. We can adapt our offer. We can support our customer. But we are not magicians, and to find a quick solution as the people expected. It's a common effort for everybody, during the crisis. And we try to find small and smaller solution to each day. It's for our customer and for us, but the main point and the main problem that we have in Africa, it's when you are in Europe or in Far East, all the structures and the law structure are supported by the state in general. And in Africa, a lot of points are done by the private economy and operators. So it's not easy to give the right answer at this moment.
All right, thank you. Sébastien, this one's for you. What is the probability that Africa will benefit from supply chain migration from Asia?
I believe that the relocation of the transformation of the commodities is very important and will increase, because Africa, I mean, we started with announcing some exports. Commodities can be cashew, cotton, coffee, cocoa, minerals, manganese, bauxite, you can name it, woods, and most of these commodities are exported as raw materials. So we see that more and more transformation, can be chocolate paste, can be whatever you want, are starting to build, and the COVID situation will increase this move. So same thing for the automotive industry, because with the stop down of the importation, and that in South Africa, because South Africa is a very important market for automotive, we see that more and more assembly plants will be dispatched along Africa, in Ghana, in Nigeria, in Kenya. So yes, it will increase and speed some of the reallocation of transformation units based on the wealth of the African economy.
Thank you so much for that. Bola, interesting question that we got from Tom from the Sumitomo Corporation. He's the business development manager. Do you think that drones can be threatening to the truck transportation industry? And that's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Very interesting. I think volume will be a big issue. I think definitely for some very specialized product, the drones will be good. But when you have large volume, when you have to feed a population of 200 million, and you look at Ethiopia, growing markets. So I think drone definitely will have a very unique part to play, but I'm not convinced that, there's going to be a huge substitution.
Here's another question for you, Bola. Do you see any change on African countries moving to an agricultural economy, from an agricultural-based economy to industrial in the next 5 years? Obviously, we're talking about processing, which Sébastien was alluding to. What will the role of logistics companies be when this starts happening?
I think industrialization is still at a very infancy stage in our continent, with the exception of South Africa. So I think in parallel, we are looking at, you see a lot of industrial zones being built across Africa. You see special export zones going on. And most likely, you're going to start seeing value-added agribusiness in some of those zones. So I think they're going to be in parallel. I think Africa agribusiness really is the next frontier. And I do not see one or the other. I see them in parallel.
Absolutely. Agribusiness is a really hot topic right now. Sébastien, from Eva Monroe, have any of the panelists experienced changes in tariffs on imported goods, worrying reports emerging around increased imposition of tariffs on specifically renewable energy components impacting projects and maintenance costs? Have you seen just generally import tariffs being slapped on goods?
We have not seen any. I mean, if you speak about custom duties or taxes, we can see that there are some regional area which are, we cannot call that free zone for the time being, but this will be very important for the developing in Africa. It is to say the regional areas will have to be speed up. Because what we see in some of the European market or some, let's say, free zone in the world, you can gain 5 to 10% if you cut your custom taxes at the border and allow some free cooperation within this area. So it is very interesting now to see that this eco discussion, Nigeria, which is playing a huge role. By the size of its economy, and at least the discussion are on the table, and the intra-regional trade must be developed, and the crisis of the COVID as I think will speed up this intra-regional integration.
Yeah, I mean, are you still very optimistic about intra-Africa trade? David, very quickly, do you think that the African Free Trade Agreement is going to be a game changer for MSC?
Well, we must be optimistic, because I think the place of the Africa in the world is very important for the future, with the human resource, with the natural resource, and they must take the challenge for the relocations we discussed. And the main question in the relocations is the capability of the energy. If you want to implant industry and to transform the product, you must have the energy and the political stability in each country and the good financial conditions. If the states can find a good attractivity for investors and the energy of each economic operators and African economic operators can give some a good upgrade of the global economic situation in Africa. We are optimistic, and I'm sure that Africa can resist better than some other continents to the COVID-19 crisis.
All right, fantastic. Bola, here's a question that I'd like for you to focus on. It actually also speaks to something I didn't get a chance to ask you about, the competitive environment within ports on the continent, that I find they are competing, like Durban Port then competing with what Namibia is doing in Mozambique. And Marlon Burgess is talking about the size of the Mozambique LNG project in particular. What impact does that do you think it'll have on trade and logistics in the rest of Africa? We're seeing so much money being thrown at ports right now, and I'm almost getting the sense that the big guys are starting to go, well, you know what, we have to up our game now because we've got competition.
So definitely competition is good. I really don't know much about that specific transaction and the dynamics, the parameters around it. But I think wherever you have competition, that is great. And what you do find then you have, it would have a better impact on the end users. Prices would go down. And then of course it has a domino effect as well. So everybody then wants to replicate it because, you know, you've actually started and you've broken the jinx. So I think it's a positive feedback, in terms of the specific of how that transaction is structured, I'm not very familiar with it.
Okay, fantastic. Sébastien, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, if I may, I mean, this LNG project in Mozambique, it's one of the biggest projects in Africa, which we're speaking about $60 billion investment in the north of Mozambique. And we have worked on this project, and it has been a bit delayed because of the COVID situation. But this will be undoubtedly a big game changer for Mozambique. It has to be, let's say, wisely run by the government, because gas and such investment can have a huge impact on the local economy. But it will bring some subcontractor. It will increase the wealth of the area. So this is a very interesting project for the country.
Sébastien, very quickly, on the competitive front on ports, do you find that ports are starting to compete for business? Are you seeing that anecdotally?
They are competing for transshipment, Eleni. So. You know, with the size of the vessel now that can reach 24,000 TEUs, you need water. So ports are modernizing their berths, their capacity, increasing their let's say crane specificity, because the size of the vessel are increasing, and we need to be much more speedy in terms of productivity. Yes. So over the continent, you can say that there are some competition within the port. And Durban being, let's say, parastatal ports, is by some shipping lines has been a bit, let's say, criticized because of the lack of investments, maybe compared with you mentioned Namibia. So yes, there are competition.
All right, so I've got one last question. This is going to be the final one. Prigo Ramsey says, Mauritius is ranked first in doing business, very low tax rate. Do you think that it's a competitive location for warehousing in the context of the African free trade area linking Asia and Africa? Bola, do you think that's an interesting kind of proposition?
Can you please repeat the question? So it wasn't very clear.
Do you think Mauritius could play a connecting role between Africa and Asia, specifically on warehousing?
I think yes, definitely, because you have a country that's between the Indian Ocean and the Atlantic. So I think definitely Mauritius can play a big role. And yes, definitely, and I think there are several hubs across the continent as well that can support that.
Fantastic.
Mauritius is one of transshipment hub between Africa and Far East.
And do you think that that is an interesting proposition, David?
It's yet. We do a lot of transshipment in Port-Louis in Mauritius, in the port, between Far East and Africa.
Is that going to grow, do you think? Do you think that that is going to be a stronger...
it can be, but they should have a competition in the next future from some other ports like Mombasa, or, it's always a competition for the transshipment.
Fantastic. Okay. Very quickly from each of you, are you just holding on tight? Do you think we're going to get through this pandemic? And do you think the future is bright for your industry? Very quickly, Bola.
Yes, I do. I think 18 months from now, we're back and smiling and new opportunities will arise.
David.
I'm always optimistic for Africa, but Africa is not a country, it's a continent. So each country has to take in their hands their future.
Absolutely. And for you, Sébastien?
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic. I mean, Africa has been showing some resilience, reactivity, adaptation to this crisis. A lot needs to be done, but we see improvement, and I'm quite optimistic on the recovery. Or if recovery, we have to speak about to the future of Africa.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us. Thank you to our panelists, and of course to the attendees as well. Don't forget that we are still going to be bringing you one last webinar that will be coming through in the next couple of weeks as well. And here it is, COVID crisis and mining, what will be the new normal. So that will be coming up soon. We'll be announcing the date soon. Oh, the 9th of July. There you go. So we'll be hopefully seeing you back then. Thank you very much to Sébastien, David, and Bola for joining us and for your insights, and of course to Sanjeev as well. And we wish you all the very best. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.